So let's continue our discussion. So just as a summary, uh, we're talking about the teenage brain, the adolescent teenage brain. Um, and the adolescent brain really is anywhere between the age of 12 and 25. 12 and 25. So even when you're raising teenagers and they're in their lower 20s, the teenage brain um, doesn't actually fully come the uh, the prefrontal cortex area of the brain. There's a lot of changes that are occurring. The prefrontal cortex area of the brain isn't fully developed, is not fully engaged with the rest of the brain. And the prefrontal cortex area of the brain is that part of the brain that really helps us reason and plan and problem solve and helps us regulate our emotions, et cetera, et cetera. It thinks about consequences, for instance. Um, and this actually doesn't really fully develop until we're about 25 years old. So just imagine, right? Dealing with anybody who's 25 years of age or younger, and not having their prefrontal cortex fully on board, not having their prefrontal cortex fully on board. Why is this important? Well, this is important because if that area isn't fully on board, then the brain is reacting to other stimulus that is being processed not from the prefrontal cortex, not with this regulatory system that comes in, but from a purely limbic or what we call early mammalian system. And when we say the limbic system, what we're talking about is the emotions that we all deal with, that we all deal with. One of the things about mindfulness is that um, uh, we can actually, how many of us have had the experience where our emotions got to us, where we were so emotional that we were purely reactive, and maybe we didn't really think about the consequences of our actions? So this is also happening to many of us, even though we have our prefrontal cortex that's connected to the rest of the brain. Sometimes what happens is that when we are experiencing something emotional, we flip our lid, right? We literally flip our lid. We lose our SHIT, whatever you want to call it. And neuroscientifically, what that is essentially your limbic system, or your emotional regulation system, being so active that we can't actually control it or regulate it with our prefrontal cortex. Okay. How many of you have had the experience where you just got so emotional that you did something and you maybe regretted it the day after or a few hours after? All right. Has that ever happened to anyone? Where you flipped your lid because maybe somebody pissed you off so much and you knew maybe you shouldn't have done it, but you did. Um, you're like, damn, I shouldn't have, thrown that water bottle at him, but I did, and I was pissed, and then I regretted it afterwards. Right? That's the prefrontal cortex not coming. So imagine, right, if you've ever had an experience like that, imagine that sort of dysregulation can be happening all the time in in an adolescence, in a teenager. but they're not even aware that their prefrontal cortex isn't on. They're not even aware that this regulatory system exists. And so we're trying to have a conversation with them, or we're trying to plan something with them, and we are assuming that they have the same sort of mental capacity as we do. But in fact, the mental capacity that they have would be analogous to when we lose our lid all the time. Right? Because they don't have that extra layer that comes in that helps to reason, plan, and problem solve. Okay. The teenage brain or the adolescent brain is also undergoing a very powerful change anatomically. So not only do they not have this prefrontal cortex that's allowing them to regulate, but they are also undergoing that process that we talked about of myelination, where they're forming a sheath around their neurons, and their neurons are essentially communicating 3,000 times more efficiently. 3,000 times more efficiently than they did when they were a child. Okay, so they lack the regulation, and their neurons are going super fast and are communicating better. Okay. Now, to me, that's really fascinating. The other fascinating part, and this is really important if you're parents, or if you hang, if you're teenagers, or you coach, or you teach, and you have adolescents. Remember, when we're talking about this, we're talking about people who are between the ages of sort of 12 and 25. Okay, that is a huge amount. That is a huge age range. Okay, we think that when you are 21 and you can vote and drink alcohol, et cetera, that you have all this wisdom. In fact, the prefrontal cortex still isn't engaged in a 22-year-old, right? So you could be having a 22, 23 college graduate, and their prefrontal cortex may still not be fully engaged. So when we're talking about this, we're really talking about everyone from the age of 12 to 25. To me, this is really interesting, is that adolescents in this age range, because the prefrontal cortex isn't on board yet, and they're undergoing this myelination process, which is making their neurons communicate 3,000 times more efficiently, they are reacting about 3 times more intensely to the same stimulus than either a child or an adult. So imagine the adolescent brain reacting. Let's say I fed the adolescent brain a teaspoon of sugar, or I gave an adolescent $100, something that would produce some sort of reward for them. That the adolescent brain, the teenage brain, is actually 3 times more sensitive. So it's emitting 3 times more of a potent signal with the same stimulus. So imagine giving a Snickers bar, the same Snickers bar to a 6-year-old and the same Snickers bar to a 13-year-old. But yet the reward pathway in the 13-year-old is firing 3 times more intense than in the 6-year-old, with the lack of executive functioning, with the lack of control from the prefrontal cortex. All right, so now the same stimulus is creating a much stronger reward signal in the brain for these adolescents. Okay. We are very, very highly driven by our dopamine, by the dopamine secretion in the brain. Okay, so if you can imagine these kids, these adolescents, teenagers who get a stimulus and then dump dopamine, if they feel like there's reward from that stimulus, what are then they going to be doing? If they get 3 times more dopamine dump from the same stimulus, they're going to be feeling that dopamine high. They're going to be going after more and more things that give them a reward without having the control, the wherewithal, the regulation of the prefrontal cortex. So what do they end up doing? Well, they naturally behave more risky. They participate in more risky behaviors. It's not a hormonal thing. These are not he's raging with hormones, or it's all the testosterone flowing through him. No. These are not hormones. That's actually a big myth that has been debunked. All right. These are neurobiological changes that are occurring in the teenage brain and increased sensitivity to the same stimulus of a reward. When you get, if you, for instance, have your favorite food, you are going to release a whole bunch of dopamine. That makes it feel good. You feel a reward from that. That makes it feel good. What are you going to want to do? Go back and eat that food. Okay, that's a small example. But what happens is that as we're looking for more rewards because we get more dopamine that's flooding our system. And where do those rewards mostly come from? They do come from kids want to engage in more risky behavior because that has a tendency of having a higher dopamine response without the regulation from the prefrontal cortex. Okay. So they may make poor choices sometimes. And hopefully we can help guide them. Okay. We can help guide them in making those choices. So for instance, if you're noticing, I was just talking to somebody the other day, if you're noticing, for instance, that your teenager is participating in more risky behavior, okay, maybe you actually plan like a family vacation that involves something that's a little bit more risky. For instance, maybe you go parasailing or paragliding. You go, scuba diving with sharks or something like that. You do something that you still feel like is contained, where you come in as the parent and you say, oh, I'm noticing that they're participating in more risky behaviors. Maybe we can actually add some, are they interested in even scuba diving, which could be a risky thing. I was talking to this parent who, they went diving in Mexico with whale sharks, and the teenager loved it, and the parent, their heart was pumping when they were. But it's sort of like, well, if we don't try to help them in terms of like what risky behaviors can we do that are still relatively safe to get them that, in essence, that high from the dopamine without the regulation of the prefrontal cortex, They may go off and find those the risky behaviors on their own. Okay. But knowing this, why is this a neurobiological mechanism? Well, it's really about preparing the teen to leave the home. It's really about preparing the teen to become more independent. And as the teenager feels as if they can become more independent, they are going to push their parents away, and they're going to seek more stimulus from the environment that they're in. That environment is going to include their peers. All right. And so they are seeking stimulus from their environment, from their peers during this time period, engaging in more risky behavior, in essence, testing the waters, right, of what they can participate in, what they can do, what they can push, and still continue to grow and mature and become into independent human beings, and then be able to leave the cave or the den or whatever it might be, your home, right? They leave the home and they can actually be independent, functioning human beings. Cool part is that we've all gone through this. we've all done this. We've all done this. Okay. If we see this, this can be a great time to help the teenager. All right. Not only, as difficult as it might be, not only to practice mindfulness, to see, even though the prefrontal cortex isn't fully engaged, can we get them to witness their thoughts, to witness their emotions, to witness their sensations, as opposed to feeling as if they are their thoughts, emotions, and sensations, right? When you feel like you are your emotion, that's when you have intermittent explosive disorder. I love that. That's when we flip our lid. So even bringing mindfulness, and this doesn't have, the schools are starting to teach this, but this is actually a way of sort of seeing, can we start to actually separate the self from the sensation, the emotion, the thought, right? And there's some and just our basic mindfulness exercises can help with this. All right. But knowing that they're going for new adventures, that they're seeking new relationships, that they want to try out new things, right? That this is actually how their brain is being wired, that they're looking for this, right? Can we help them in any way to go on trips or field trips or excursions that provide these new adventures, that expand, let's say, the number of people that they may be interacting with, because they are seeking new relationships, they are seeking new paths in life, whatever it might be? That we try to do that with love and compassion, but also nurturance, right? Opening them up to new communities, going to new places. Maybe this is, maybe you have a favorite vacation spot and you go there every year. And maybe when they're teenagers, you find a different spot to go to, someplace new, someplace with maybe a little bit more adventure, a little bit more thrill, where there's that thrill aspect to it, right? Or if they want to go on the ride that you're like, I'm not so sure about that, maybe you let them go. that you start sort of teaching them a little bit about that independence in an intelligent way, right? That you maybe offer them new challenges, different stimulus, new environment, new people, that in a relatively safe way, you're exposing them to this. You know that it's activating their dopamine pathway, but it's not a life or death situation. You know, I'm jumping off this cliff to dive into the ocean or something like that. All right. If you think about your own life and think about the things that you did between the ages of 12 and 25, and if you would do those same things now, right? I did some crazy rock climbing that now when I think back of it, I think I was crazy. But I was as safe as, you know, sort of like I was as safe as possible. I had a rope. Never did free climbing or anything like that. Uh, but if I think back now, I'm like, man, that was crazy. Okay. That was a risk. Bungee jumping, whatever it might be, where you look back and you go, oh yeah, you know, I was 21 when I went bungee jumping off that. You know, I was 20 when I was 19. I was, you know, 22 or whatever like that. So you're actually going to do things that you may not do later on in life. Because of this risk-taking behavior that occurs, this is also a really good time for creativity. As a parent, we might see this as, oh my goodness, they're going against the norm, or they're challenging authority, or whatever it might be. And that's exactly what they are doing. Because there's this element of reward, of risky behavior, that they might take on problems and not think about the consequences, let's say, of, oh, you know, that's not going to work. If you think about many of the discoveries, for instance, that were made, many discoveries that were made in adolescent minds, people in their young 20s, late teens. You know, I always think of like Facebook that was started in college, you know, or whatnot. And so, can we take advantage of this time period to help the teen not only generate new ways of thinking, of directing that energy, right, in more creative ways? If they come to you and say, you know, look, I really want to solve, you know, world hunger, that we don't shut it down. Because we go, oh my God, that, you know, it's like first thing, it's like, oh my God, that seems like such a big problem. Well, to them, that's a risk. There's a reward in there. They're looking for new solutions. They don't have that prefrontal cortex that's inhibiting, or that's regulating, or that's controlling some of the thoughts that are coming up. Right? And so not only can we maybe help steer the ship a little bit in terms of what environment are they interacting with, and knowing that, oh, you know what, I may open up the environment that they are interacting with, open up the people that they're interacting with, maybe expose them to different groups of people, maybe go on vacation to different things, maybe ask them and see, do they want to do more things that are a little bit more risk taking? And everybody has a spectrum of risk, right? Whatever that might be. But even saying like, hey, you know, what seems risky, right? Hey, we're going to Mexico, or we're going to the Grand Canyon. Maybe going on a helicopter ride seems risky. I ask my son all the time, I go, hey, do you want to go on a helicopter? No, I don't want to go. No. He's 9. I'll see what he says when he's 14 now. Okay. We all have a spectrum of what risk we're willing to take. And if we take it, and if we look at the teenage adolescent years as, oh, this opening into it, how can we expose them to things in an intelligent way that not only can stimulate their creativity, that not only leads them to maybe solutions to problems that older people haven't figured out because we are inhibited by our prefrontal cortex, but also that increases the risk, that increases a bit of risk that helps them activate that reward pathway that they're going for, that helps them expand into new territories, new relationships. Okay. These are really all ways that teenagers are using biologically to learn how to adapt, to their environment, to learn how to adapt to being out of the maternal or paternal home, to start creating their own home, to start becoming more independent. And so if we see it as that, and we can nurture it as that, maybe there's a greater way of developing these teenagers, as opposed to just saying, their hormones are blaring, which turns out not to be true. And that maybe we can actually help them navigate these challenges of this transition, seeing it as a transition period in the exploration of the world. And so we can send them off to be, independent thinkers. All right. That's that. That was a lot. But I hope that gives a bit of a framework around the teenage brain, what it is going through biologically, and the importance of that transition. Okay, with that then, I send you all love and health, and have a beautiful weekend. And even if you see some teenagers at the grocery store or at 7-Eleven, maybe you just wait, send them a little love and compassion, and be, man, that brain is going 3,000 times faster, man. Good luck. All right. Have a good one. Bye-bye.